Hello everyone! In the previous tutorial we learned the basics about EarScript and we managed to create this track. In today's tutorial we're going to learn about tables and how we can use them to make our music more interesting. So let's get back here and what is a table? This is a table, but it's a very small 1x1 table. And we can increase its size by setting the number of columns to, for example, 10. And with a dot. And then we see that now my table has 10 columns. And we can also set the number of rows to 3, for example. And now my table is bigger than before. And what we can do with tables is we can have more numbers to set them. So for example, I can have a 5 and I can move to the right. I can set it to 2 and return the value, but then I can return to the previous cell and I once again have the 5. So for example, I set the initial cell to 5, I move to the right, then I set it to 2, I return the value, and then I return to 5. And it still remembers the previous value that I had. So this can be used for a lot of different things. The commands that you can use for moving around are, you can move to the right, you can move to the left, you can move up, and you can move down with backtick. The table will show that moving up looks like moving down, but that's okay. So first we move right from the initial tile, then we move left, then we move up, which looks like moving down, and then we move down, which looks like moving up in this table. Okay. Next, what we can do is also move directly to some column or move directly to some row. So let's see what that looks like. So we move right, left, up, down, and then we move directly to the 4th column, and then we move directly to the 2nd row. So all of these commands you can, for example, do move twice in one direction, move back by 1, similar here. So you can move twice in one direction, then return once, then move twice in another, and so on. So once again, in EarScript we have tokens, which are made of a head and a tail. And if there is no tail, the tail is secretly 1. However, the tail doesn't need to be a constant number. It can also be a reference to a previous style. So for example, let's make this just 3 columns. And so what we're going to do is just make an infinite loop. Well, we just say we set the first one to 1. And what we're going to do is make an infinite loop, which each turn we move to the right, we add what's on wherever, we add 1, and then we return the value. Let's see what that looks like. It sets to 1, then it moves and adds 1 and 1, and it just increases everything by 1 each time. But now instead of having this tail, which is the 1 tail, I'm going to write left. And so each time it's going to add what's the value on the cell on the left. So here it added a 1 because we had a 1 on the left. Here it adds a 1 because we have a 1 on the left. And now here, instead of adding a 1, it added a 2. And now here it will add a 3 to get a 4. And then we're going to get 2 plus 4, which is going to be 6. 6 plus 3, which is going to be 9. 9 plus 6, which is 9 plus 4, which was before, which gives us 13, and so on and so forth. So this can be quite useful depending on what you want to do. So for example, I can have 10 columns and I want them to set to like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. What I can do is just do 10 times, move to the right, set to the value that's on the left and at 1. And so what is going on is I'm moving, and then I get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And if I don't do this, I can get everything in one go, right? Okay. The next thing we can do with tables is that we can create new tables with the $sign. The first time we use it, we just name the main table. But the next time we use it, we create a new table. So for example, here we see that we have the main table and the X table. If we press, if we have another $sign without anything, we return to the main table. And so for example, let's set the X table to 5. So the main table is still 0. The X table is set to 5. And one other type of tail we have is referencing another table. So I can do equals to X plus X and then times X. And so what it's going to do is it's going to, first we have 0, then we set it to whatever value X has. So for example, 5. Then we add 5, we get a 10, and then we multiply by 5 and we get a 50. Yeah. And with this, we can do all sorts of crazy stuff. But let's see what we can do in terms of music. Once again, this is what our track looks like at this moment. If we open it, let's open our collection and then so what if we want to make this a bit faster? One way to do it is to, instead of using quarter notes, we could use 8th notes. And so this is the first thing we're going to do after we copy and paste so that we have our previous melody and our new melody that we're going to work on. And when I press F5, I get this compile to source, which shows exactly what I have, what this diagram is getting translated in terms of ear script. So for example, this part here is this part here, whereas this part here is this part here. But I noticed that it has already a header where we have defined several tables. The note table is the main table where we decide which note we are playing, but the forward table is going to tell us what's the gap between each note, and the duration is telling us how long the notes are playing for. So let's try to first change the forward table. So we move to the forward table, and what we're going to do is we notice that it's set to 1 quarter note. So we're going to set it to 1/8 note. And we do this by moving there. And this is a table with like 2 rows, and it's giving us like a fraction. So the first is going to be 1/8 note. If we wanted 3/8 notes, we could be like that. So let's see how that sounds now. Yeah, we notice that the notes now are connected together as well. And this is because the duration is also 1/8 note. So let's make the duration instead 1/16 note. Yeah. And so now it will no longer sound like they're as connected as before. That sounds like a very great melody. But now let's try to make some of the notes longer than the others. So this first note I think is quite important. And so we're going to make it sound twice as long as before. Now what I can do is just write forward is equal to 2 and duration is equal to 2. And I'm just changing one of the cells in the forward table instead of both, because I'm still happy with using 8 notes as the denominator. So what this is going to do is make everything be twice as long. So what we're going to do is just copy, paste, and make this return to duration 1. And let's see how that sounds. So what's happening is now it sounds like everything is out of sync, because now we have like a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 instead of 1, 2, 3, 4. So instead of doing 3 notes, let's do just 2. And let's see how that sounds. Another table we can change is the type of note. So let's try to make the first note a hold note by changing the type to, let's see, we press F5 again to see this cheat sheet. And I notice that type 0 is the tap, type 1 is the hold. If I wanted to make a mine, I would use type 4. So we use type equals to 1. And here we set type equals to 0. And finally, we just change this duration from 2 to 3 to make it just a bit longer. So the main reason why forward and duration are different from each other is that sometimes we want to be able to have shorter durations to make a pizzicato effect, or sometimes we want to have longer durations for making hold notes of a specific length, while we might still have other notes tapping around. Yeah, so for example, if I set this to 6, I could have you yeah, but let's just set it back to 3. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is we're gonna look at, if you don't want to start forwarding a duration every single note, what we can do is do what we're going to do here. So this is the bass. It's just walking up with 1/4 notes. And we're just gonna copy this and paste it and use the new version. And another way to change the forward and duration of notes without having to change the tables is by using some of the special outputs. So if we just use dot or dot 1, we tap and forward. If we use dot 2, we only tap. If we use dot 3, we only forward. And if we use dot 4 all the way up to dot 16, we can use different forwards and durations. So I'm going to use this dot 6, which is 1.5 times as long. And then I'm going to use a dot 4. So here is what it sounds before. Just look at the quarter notes. It's yeah. And with the new rhythm, it is now like this. So if you don't want to write too many forward and durations, you can use this, especially if there's some place where you just need a couple of notes to be faster than usual. Yeah. Then what we're going to do is look at the chord, and what we did here is we set this to 0, and then we tap without forwarding, move up, and tap without forwarding, move up, and tap without forwarding, and then finally tap. And this is one way to tap multiple notes at the same time. But here's the interesting thing. The note, which is the default table, we can make it bigger. And if we make it bigger by adding more rows, what I can do is set it to 0, and then set it to 1, and then set it to 2. We haven't tapped anything. We just have changed the row, and we have made a little column with different values. And the way it works is that when you have a column that is with multiple rows, you tap all of the notes at the same time in this column. This is true for the chord. It's also true for the lead instrument. So if you want double notes, you can use either taps without forwarding or multiple rows in your column. So let's just see how that sounds. Yeah, if we didn't set this to multiple rows, you see that we only have one note. Yeah. Okay. So now the other thing you can do is, for example, set multiple columns. And so now we have 2 columns, and I'm going to predefine them. And instead of being 0, 1, and 2, the next one is going to be 1, 2, and 3. And so what I can do is just every time I loop, I move forward. And so it plays all the notes in a column at the same time, but it only plays one column at a time. And so we can change the column we're in to play a different column. So let's see how this sounds. Yeah, it looks like it's going up and down because we're changing the chords we're playing every time. Okay, we'll just add back the silence we had, and we are now getting this. Yeah, okay. And one last final thing. Well, a couple more, but let's look at the drums. So these are our drums at the moment. We once again copy and paste them. And our new drums are going to be a bit different because we're going to add some fun part. So what I'm going to do is 8 times I'm going to set it to 4 and tap without forwarding, and then set it to 5 and tap, but just half as much. Let's see how that sounds. Yeah, and then it goes back into our main loop. And the main thing is that it's getting like I am tapping a lot of the same kind of sound. But what we want to do is to increase in intensity. And so we use one of the other tables that are defined, which is the velocity. The velocity is the volume in a way. So we're going to set the velocity to 20, and velocity 100 is the normal. So velocity 20 is much quieter. And what we're going to do then is we're going to increase the velocity each time in this loop by 10. And now this is what we get. And so you see that the intensity of these like snare drums is getting higher and higher in this. And this is something that we can add at the end of a loop. So we can remove it from here and put it at the end. And instead of making it an infinite loop, now we make it loop 6 times. And so we get this, our usual loop. So it helps to make a transition a bit more interesting. Yeah, we technically could start changing the velocity of every note to make a much better music by having dynamic sounds that sound louder or quieter all the time. We usually just make the melody like this without much changes in velocity. But if you want to, you can change the velocity. The last thing we will do is we'll look at the measure, and let's look at the tables in the measure machine. The first is the default one, which is the harmony, which we now notice is a table with 21 rows. And we see that we are kind of defining these 21 values around here, which is a lot of information. So we won't look into this quite yet. But we will look at this tempo table, which can be quite easy to get into, because now I can just change the tempo to whichever tempo I want. The default is 120, but I can send it to 180, and now we have this madness. And yeah. You will notice that we also have the signature, which is a bit like the forward. It is 4x4. I can set it to 5x4 if I want. I can set it to 11x12 if I want. 4x4 is the default. But yeah, let's end on a playtest, and that would be all for today otherwise. Yeah, thank you so much for joining, and goodbye.